I think there's lots of reasons to be enthusiastic about the marketplace for both buyers, sellers, and also realtors.
Welcome to another episode of Edmonton Real Estate Today. I am your host, Leroy Warden, and today I have with me two very special guests. Bill Briggs, he's the broker of RE/MAX Real Estate, and Cheryl Stevens of RE/MAX Real Estate. Cheryl and Bill, welcome. Good to see you guys.
Happy New Year, Leroy.
Happy New Year. The Real Estate Association of Edmonton released some stats here, and they said that the average prices for single-family homes were $411,000. Condos are at $227,000, and duplexes at $325,000. Now, what are your thoughts about the average prices, how they performed in 2019, and what do you think the prices are going to be doing in 2020?
Well, I know when I was just looking at the actual last quarter,
Yes.
I found, using single families as an example, the second last quarter of the year we were at an average around 427, and now this last quarter we're down to, the 417, just average numbers. So obviously I think that just is seasonal, and it seems to happen every year that we drop a little at the end of the year, but I do think the phones are ringing a little bit more. I think, again, things will come up as 2020 comes into play, just like every spring market does. But what do you think, Bill?
Yeah, I'm actually a little surprised that the average prices have remained as strong as they have, because we've had some difficulties in Alberta. There's no question. We've had some economic difficulties. We've had some political difficulties. We've had unrest politically between provinces and the federal government and those kinds of things.
Yes.
We've had things like the stress test, which was intended to solve problems in major markets like Toronto and Vancouver. And very unfortunately, the federal government chose a universal program to try to correct that, which has affected our marketplace here too. So our clients are having to approve for mortgages at interest rates that are vastly significantly higher than what they're going to end up with on their mortgage, which means that they can afford less if they're going for a maximum mortgage and the lowest possible down payment. So there are a number of factors in play here, and so it really surprises me that the average prices have remained as strong as they have.
Okay.
That's a good sign.
That's a good sign,
Yeah.
yes. And so as we continue in the year, I know days on market is something the board also reports on, and they talked about that the average days on market for a single family home being 64 days on the market. The condos, 77 days, and duplexes taking 75 days to sell. So what do you see as the trend in this first quarter of 2020?
Well, first of all, I'm a little skeptical about the days on market number as something that we should be using as much as we do, because after all, that's the average number of days on the market for the houses that have actually sold. We've had high inventories in recent years that have not sold, but it does not include those houses that have not sold, so have been on the market for 200 or 300 days. Believe it or not, I ran across one yesterday in my travels on the internet that had been on the market 990 days.
Oh, wow.
And so those statistics don't mean a lot to me. And I think we have to be a little careful when we're discussing that with our sellers as well, because we can't go to a seller and say, listen, if you list with me today, your house is likely to sell in 64 days.
Right.
Simply because if you don't do everything correctly, and if we don't do everything correctly, it may not sell at all.
Right.
So it's an interesting statistic. I think it's valid to look at it, but we have to explain it very carefully.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes,
and I
yes.
know when I go in with my sellers, I very much say it's just an indicator, giving you a sense of like the average time a house is taking, but also keeping in mind that there's those other houses that therefore have been on the market 200 days. The sellers finally have reduced the price, or another one sat for 100 days. They finally reduced the price, but when reducing the price, they chose to relist. So now when those two houses sell, and they sell in 30 days or 45 days, it again adds to that average of the 64, but we're not really using all the true numbers.
Right.
So I have to remind those sellers that just gives you a sense of how fast some places are moving, but like you said, they have to have it priced well. It has to show well. I actually had a client the other day where I showed them a house that's been sitting for 200 days. It did not show well at all. It was still, it kind of looked like the parents weren't living there and just the kids were, so the teenagers sort of show. That my buyer called me back later and said, Cheryl, I really like that house, but Could we ask the seller to professionally clean it before we view it again?
That's sort of like my house when my wife's away.
Exactly, but it changes how fast that house is going to sell by how it shows, right?
And on the other hand, we had a situation in our office just this last week where, believe it or not, it was all priced properly and it must have been in great condition.
Yeah.
But we got an offer on it prior to the sign going up.
Wow.
So there are amazing things going on out there still in the marketplace. You just have to do everything right.
Right,
point,
absolutely.
yeah.
And are you guys still seeing sometimes, again, if you talk about doing everything right, where if it is priced right, if it is prepared for showing properly, that you're still getting, in some areas, multiple offers where
Absolutely.
several buyers are then trying to purchase that home?
Yeah. Again, in a marketplace like we've had this last little while, you would be surprised at how many multiple offers there actually are. Now, not a lot of them are selling vastly over list price like we may be used to in the past.
Yes.
But they're selling and they've got multiple offers, there's interest out there, and there are people that can afford to buy houses.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So one of the key things for a home seller to keep in mind, even going into 2020, is not only positioning their home right in terms of pricing, but also looking at having the home prepared properly for showing and doing the little things to make the home show well.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
All right.
for sure.
So in December, the stats that were released was 1315 new listings. There were sales of 843, and the ending inventory was 5961. Now, it seemed that throughout 2019, it fluctuated between a buyer's market and a balanced market. So what are your thoughts of 2020 for the first few months of 2020 in that regard?
It's really hard making those kind of predictions because there's no question the type of market depends entirely upon the inventory.
Okay.
So it depends on the attitudes of people out there as to whether they're going to list their houses early in the year, later in the year. There's some seasonal differences that people perceive on when they put their house on the market. So it does honestly depend on the amount of inventory that we have out there. Frankly, the market has been more balanced, I think, than the impression we get when we listen to the news. And I expect that trend to continue in 2020.
Okay.
I don't think it's going to be a huge swing either direction. I believe it's a relatively balanced marketplace.
Yeah, and I would agree because I know, Bill, when we definitely listen to the news or any buyers I take out, even their coworkers are reminding them and telling them, oh, it's a buyer's market, so you just get out there. So it's so funny because it's not actually legitimately, according to the numbers, necessarily a buyer's market at certain times of the year. But I think, again, the media hears that, everybody jumps on it because it seems like that's when you'll get the best deal, especially if you're a buyer. And so therefore, we kind of just keep perpetuating that story. But as we know with the telephone game, the stories change from each person. But if we look at the numbers, it all comes down, like you said, down to inventory. So if it's a balanced market, that just means that, right now we sold 853 homes in December.
Yes.
That means we just need, roughly, I'll say 3,500 to 6,000 homes on the market, which would mean we'd be right in that balanced market, right?
And in the marketplace in general, Leroy, and I'm sure you would agree, that we not only have to caution our sellers that their product has to be priced properly,
Yes.
but we have to caution our buyers that it's an excellent marketplace right now. Interest rates are at a spectacularly low rate compared to what I'm used to in my past.
Totally.
And they've got some choices out there for inventory, so it's a great time for them to go out and look.
Yeah.
But that may not last. So,
Right.
so just like we've got to caution the sellers to price properly, we've got to caution the buyers that the marketplace is working in their favor right now, and there's no better time.
Yes,
Yeah, I would
absolutely.
agree.
And low interest rates. This is remarkably low in comparison to everything in the past,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I know I just honestly had brunch with my uncle the other day, and he was saying how back in the 80s, he was paying 17, 18%, and so many of his friends had lost their homes because of those interest rates. So we do need to value what we have and maybe not
Absolutely.
take it for granted quite so much.
So that stress test doesn't look so bad when you look at 18%.
No, that's right,
Exactly.
exactly. Well, my first house, I know that was a long time ago, but it was a 12.5% mortgage, and I thought it was fantastic. So,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Perception,
Yep.
right?
Don't want to date myself, so I'm not talking about anything.
okay, fair enough.
So, Cheryl and Bill, will 2020 be a good year for someone wanting to sell or buy a home? What do you guys see in regards to what will be happening in the next little while for someone thinking about putting their home out there?
Truthfully, I don't think there ever is a bad time. And I'll tell you why I'm that enthusiastic about the marketplace is that for particularly a first-time home buyer or a home buyer wanting to upgrade or downsize, you're buying and selling in the same marketplace. So you
Okay.
know what? It honestly doesn't matter what the marketplace is. You can wait till the price of your home goes up, but so's the one you're going to purchase.
Right.
So it's a good time for that. Secondly, I'm seeing an influx right now of out-of-city buyers that are buying investment properties.
Okay.
Places like Vancouver and Toronto have priced themselves out of range for a lot of these, particularly first-time investors and young
Yeah.
investors who are coming in here, looking at the house prices that we're selling for in our marketplace and saying, this is a great place to be. So there are a lot of good reasons why it will be a good year, as it always has been, to put your house on the market,
Yeah.
as long as you're realistic. And it's a good time to go out and buy a house because things really are working in your favor as a buyer right now.
No, and I think that's huge. And I find with my sellers, there's a lot of times that they're like, oh, well, we're losing this much money if we sell now. But I have to try to remind people that just because maybe, you know, in 2007, your house was worth $450, and maybe now it's only worth the $427, but you never actually got that money, right? It's kind of like that investment. If we would have invested in the Aurora stock, back in the day we would have made a lot, but if you didn't actually cash out, you never got that money anyways. And the same sort of thing is, instead of thinking of, what am I losing? It's like, no, but what is this move gonna do?
Yeah.
So right now my kids are little and they're growing up, they need more space. I need to buy that larger home. I just seen the other day a brand new 2-story built just last year, selling for $500,000 in Sher Park. There was years before that same house might have gone for $550,000, $600,000. But I think that's the thing, is getting in while you can now at these great interest rates and these great price points.
Well, and I'm a really bad example of what people should be around the real estate industry because I've been in my house for 35 years. So my $400,000 house is now worth $375.
Right.
I paid $89 for it. So
Right.
really, am I in bad shape? Not at
No.
all.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, it's all timing, right?
Absolutely.
And like you said, the key is that if I'm buying something else, I'm buying in that same lower
same
market.
marketplace.
Right?
Yes, and trying to time the market.
Yep.
It's whether you're trying to time the stock market or the real estate market.
Yep.
Pretty challenging to
Yeah.
do, right? All right, Bill and Cheryl, listen, are there any last comments that you want to leave us with?
No, I would just say continue to be enthusiastic about it, and if you have a reason to sell, a reason to upgrade, a reason to downsize, it's a good time to do it. Call your realtor.
Awesome.
And I'm right here for that.
There you go.
Perfect.
That's
Excellent.
awesome.
Yeah.
All right, guys, so thank you very much, and have a wonderful new year.
Thank you,
All
you
right.
as
My
well.
pleasure.
Bill,
Yep.
I appreciate
Thank you,
it.
Leroy.
All right, guys.
Yep.
Thank you.